Louisville's history educationally is very similar to what you find in the entire country. For a long period of time, in most parts of this country, it was against the law to teach African Americans how to read and write. Now, there were some exceptions in some regions like this one, but the general trend was that education worked against the interests of slavery, and even educating free people of color helped to destabilize slavery, even though they weren't enslaved themselves. So you have this stereotype on one hand that African Americans lack capacity to learn beyond a certain point, but then you've got the flat out reality of people prohibiting black learning because they felt it was going to be dangerous.
History has a lot to do with how we got to where we are today, and I think a lot of times people want to approach education from the perspective of just the here and now without a real good understanding of how history has played a role into how we got to where we are today.
As early as 1740 in this country, you had what we call compulsory ignorance laws. The first one goes from South Carolina. After Nat Turner's revolt in 1831, they spread pretty much across all of the Deep South. States like Kentucky, Tennessee, where the black population was around 20–21% or so, didn't pass laws prohibiting black education. They didn't do anything to stimulate it either. So here in Louisville, where you had a free black community, you had people able to start schools in black churches and that sort of thing. Students had to endure tremendous hostility. You know, they could be attacked on the street if people saw you carrying a book back in those days. Once the slave period is over, an organized community like Louisville was able to secure some educational opportunities for African American children, mainly through protests, petitions, that kind of thing. African Americans in other parts of the state where you had, you know, decent enough sized black populations could do the same thing. But education was very separate. It was also very unequal. There were laws in the 1880s that said a black teacher couldn't make more than 55% of what a white teacher was paid. You might have 50 cents spent on every black child for $1 spent on every white child. So you had educational opportunity, but at the same time, African American children had tremendous limitations placed on their ability to learn.
You go back to the important decision, Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954, then that's where you really began to see people really focus for the first time on understanding the importance of the role that history was playing. This idea of separate but equal, and as we know and have come to know that separate can never be equal, really has perpetuated many of the problems that we have currently in our system today.
What we saw as a crisis 30 years ago, we've lived with us for so long, it's just become a condition. And when you look at JCPS and look at the numbers, where you see significant differences between schools, but within just about every one of those schools, there's a real drop-off in terms of achievement by race. You plug in students from other racial groups, it's kind of up and down. Latino population and the Native American population will tend to parallel African Americans pretty well. The Asian American population, it kind of depends on which Asians. There's one group that's kind of sailing along. They're more recent Asian immigrants, more from Southeast Asia, who are having many of the same problems.
How much do we know about the history of Latinos in this country is one thing. How much do we know about the history of Latinos in Louisville, in the Louisville metro area, in Kentucky? It's a completely different thing. I can speak, of course, as a recent immigrant, as a Latina who is a recent immigrant, but how about those Latinos who are not immigrants, not only not recent immigrants, but not immigrants at all? And if you talk with anybody that has grown up here as a Latino, they will tell you their stories in terms of being these completely isolated, almost silenced minority, because nobody knew how to deal with them. Nobody understood how did they fit in the fabric of the culture and the society and the classroom and the schools. And I think that's what we are dealing with right now.
One of the strange paradoxes we face now is we live in a society where, by virtue of law, everybody's equal. And you would assume that outcomes and so forth would be equal as well. But again, we come back to those strange ideas running around in people's heads about race, about class, about gender. And of course, the people whose heads those ideas run around in generally are the ones that control these educational systems. And so somehow, even in a nominally non-segregated society, the same quality of education very, very seldom reaches children of color and poor children.
We have to really understand that this diversity is an asset. It's really the opportunity for someone to complement what I don't see, the abilities that I don't have, the skills that I haven't developed, and even, to do the tasks that I don't enjoy doing.
The achievement gap is kind of a new term for a very old phenomenon. The achievement gap exists by design, certainly historically. Separate but equal schools were designed to produce an achievement gap. Supporting a whole philosophy of education that was primarily vocational for African Americans and other people of color, and primarily academic for the majority of white population, inescapably creates inequality. So the inequality, in a sense, it was institutionalized. It was structural for a very, very long time. Now we're in a society where you've got the inertia of a system designed to produce one set of results on one hand. You've got the philosophy of a system that is not supposed to produce those kind of results anymore.
Today, Jefferson County Public Schools are more diverse than they have ever been. And because there's so many students from so many different backgrounds, this thing that we call cultural competence on the part of the educators and people in the school buildings is really important. And I think that having that historical perspective helps educators and helps those who come in contact with these students to be able to serve these students in a much better way. And an example of this would be truly understanding and appreciating the challenges that different groups of students bring with them to the classroom in terms of how they got to be in the current situations that they face with before they come through the doors of the school every day.
We cannot assume that when you ask one student, you can generalize. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we have, because our brains help us function in the world by categorizing. And this is something I teach constantly. It's a very useful skill. When I come to work in the morning, I know that this is not something to eat. This is a pen, and I used to write it. But it's not like I have to stop and think, oh, is this edible or not? It's my brain is categorizing: edible, not edible, safe, not safe. So how do we challenge that very useful mental, organizational ability that we have as humans, not to apply that to human beings, especially when we are not familiar with them?
How do you work with these 30 very different little creatures every day, or every hour in many cases? And teachers need tools for that. They need to get it through the schools themselves, through professional development. They all have to work on rank at universities. They need to get it there. They need to get it from, in a sense, apprenticing under teachers who've already mastered these kind of techniques. But you kind of triangulate. And if you're lucky, you get a really good teacher at the end of that. If you're not, you may get a teacher who's great with a few students and hopefully just no worse than ordinary with the rest.
A teacher's responsibility or a teacher's job in a school is to make sure that they're bringing the curriculum to the students in a way that's meaningful to the students. Education research has proven through the years that it does make a difference in how you present information to students in terms of whether or not they're able to receive, process, and make sense of that information. And history has a large part to do with why there is a difference in terms of how we process information. Just looking at males and females, for example, in terms of how they learn and their different modalities and receptiveness in order to learn information and learning styles. Looking at African American students versus European students of European descent, Asian students and the way that they approach school and learning. All of these are very different, and the differences are not because of the race or necessarily the gender, but because of the styles of learning that these different groups bring with them to the classroom.
You can take students who, based on test scores, look the same. You know, they're in the same tracking groups and all that kind of thing. And then put them in some schools and you'll still see a significant gap. Now these are kids that on paper are all the same because you group them based on that. But then you still see the same differences. You have other schools that have kind of a different way of working with students and operating with students. You can take kids that may look very different on paper, but you can bring them all up. An awful lot has to do with what educators do. We often want to say that the differences in achievement are related to differences in students. I think at a more fundamental level, the differences in achievement are related more to how we work with students differently.
I think that's why it's so important to shift that paradigm, to start questioning, okay, what am I expected? What did I learn I had to do as a teacher? And push that and say, well, from all of those things that I learned, what may be not useful anymore? Because we are in a constant flow of change. And that is part of the challenge of having the diverse, extremely diverse population that we have at JCPS today.
You may have students, for example, an African-American student, you give that student praise and he or she glows just like a little lightning bug. A student from an Asian culture, you give them praise, they're embarrassed. Now, your heart may be in the right place. You may be doing the same thing for one student as you are for the other student, but the effect is going to be very, very different. I mean, you need to know what you're doing to work with students effectively.
And so for teachers, we call this pedagogy. We call it their ability to be able to instruct in a way in which students are able to receive. And in order for the playing field to be level, we must refer to it and begin to understand equity pedagogy. That is teaching methods that give every student an equal opportunity to be able to access and understand this information, and for equality in terms of the outcomes and the outputs as a result of that information.
So there has always been diversity in our classrooms. We just didn't notice it. And now that the spotlight is on it, we say, oh, okay, we have this diverse population that we have to teach. How do we do this? There was always diversity, ethnic diversity. Sometimes it was invisible. There was always race diversity. There were always students that had different abilities. There has always been, of course, age, but learning styles, we have put more of the spotlight on that. Religious diversity, socioeconomic diversity, very important.
There's several other dimensions of diversity that educators have to be prepared to deal with. Students who have disabilities form kind of a subgroup of their own. They experience life in our society often in ways that are very different. They've been victims of a variety of prejudices over the years. Teachers need to be sensitive to the fact that students who may be differently abled are still able, and how to provide the kind of support those students need.
One thing that I think that educators will begin to see as they truly understand using the differences in the classroom as an asset for students is that when you do a modification for a student who has, for example, a learning disability, One thing that you'll notice is that it provides many of those changes that you do in terms of modifying your instruction are providing a more structured environment for students in general. So those adaptations in terms of a teacher's approach to the classroom or adjusting anything for the school to make the school more inclusive are going to benefit all students, not just that one specific targeted group of students. So the things that these practices that teachers and educators begin to change in their schools and in the classrooms will benefit all students and really begin to make a change that all students can understand, can benefit from, and will enhance their learning outcomes.
You can learn about what makes your student comfortable or uncomfortable. What does your student like? What experiences have excited your student? What makes them get excited and passionate about what they're learning?
Well, in terms of a short-term fix, just to get teachers on the right path, to working more effectively with diverse student groups in their classroom, there are a couple of things they can do. One is they need to study. You could have children from who knows how many different racial groups, class positions in their classroom every day. So one thing you know right off the bat is that if you deal with them as if they're all the same, they can be equal in a fundamental sense, but if you deal with them as if they're all the same, some students are going to benefit, some students are not. So you need to learn more about the kind of students that you work with. Hopefully you got it when you were going through higher ed. The likelihood is you didn't. So their books, there's a fairly short list of really good introductory surveys that you can encourage people to read.
I think that there are really three things that immediately come to mind that I think teachers can and should do to address the diversity in their classroom and equal opportunity of outcomes for all students. Number one, teachers need to know their practice. They need to understand and have a real good knowledge of the content that they're teaching. They need to immerse themselves in it in such a way that they will be able to present that content in a variety of ways in multiple perspectives so that all students have an opportunity to have access to that content. Secondly, I would say that teachers need to build relationships with their students. Teachers need to focus on developing an understanding of and appreciation for the diversity that the students bring to the classroom. They can do this by forming and enhancing the relationships that they have at home with parents of the students that they have. They can do this by reading the history of students and getting to know and understand and appreciate that particular students and the gifts that they bring to the classroom, by incorporating things related to that student's culture into the classroom as being another really important piece of that. And then the most, I think, important thing for teachers to do is to have high expectations for all students in the classroom. To truly not just say that they believe all students can learn, but to demonstrate that through their daily actions and the daily activities and expectations that they have for students in their classroom.
We know that if teachers at a fundamental level, even though they've been told over and over again this is not true, but at a fundamental level, believe that some groups of children are capable of learning more than other groups of children just by virtue of their complexion or whatever cues you can pick up in terms of social class. I mean, you can usually tell gender, that's pretty obvious. But if you believe this, it's just like the research that looks at all other professionals. If a nurse believes that about, some patients are worth more than others. A doctor believes that some patients are worth more than others. A lawyer believes some clients are worth more than others. A psychiatrist believes that some of his patients are worth more than others. It affects the way they serve these people. It's one of these dirty little secrets that people don't like to talk about a lot, but you see it in all the professions. Sigmund Freud talked about this stuff back in the 20s. about which clients were deserving and which clients were not. And you give your all to the people who are deserving, and the others you just try to make comfortable. But this is why these thought patterns are so deadly. And they're so easy to hide, quite frankly. You can always do the right dance, say the right thing. Once you get behind that classroom door, you know, these are the kids you call on, these are the kids you work hard to serve, and these are the kids that kind of get what's left over. And all of us know that this goes on. If you ask teachers and nurses and social workers, doctors, all that, everybody knows it goes on. Nobody wants to talk about it that much or talk about what to do with it. But it starts with these ideas that run around in people's heads about difference. And difference can just mean difference. It doesn't mean a hierarchy or some kind of rank order of value. But when people think it does mean some sort of hierarchy or rank, it affects how they behave. And that affects the quality of education.
We really can't ignore the past, because the past has brought us to where we are today, and it's critical to understanding our students today, and it's critical to understanding our school system and where we've gotten to be in our current education state. So as we go back and re-educate ourselves on the past, we use that then as a lens through which we see schools today, and then we use that in a way to approach doing some corrective action in terms of our approaches to instruction, our approaches to students, our approaches to curriculum, and then also really gives us a sense of wanting to correct some of the things that maybe should have happened when the schools were integrated, some things that happened many, many years ago that have led us to where we are today. So educators, education leaders, and teachers in the classroom, and all those that work with students from the time they get on the bus until the time they leave school, we must begin to understand and appreciate and value the diversity and see that diversity as a real asset to what students are learning in the classroom.
What teachers know is very, very important to how they're going to behave. Most folks that go into teacher ed have only a passing acquaintance with content. Somehow the pedagogy drives out the content. So there are a lot of things in general, just in terms of the social sciences, the humanities, the history side, that these students are not as exposed to as students who go through other programs that we offer.
The optimum level of cultural competence is not only understanding, noticing differences, understanding them, utilizing them, but really integrating them so that we all benefit. I mean, I think, imagine the challenge, and this is a challenge of inclusion. Imagine the challenge. If you exclude a kid in your class because Jamie is too dirty, too always late, or acting up too crazy in class. And so you start excluding Jamie from artistic activities. You don't send Jamie to the science fair. Well, maybe that Jamie is that super smart brain that one day will discover the cure for cancer. Not only for people like Jamie and Jamie's family, but for my family and everybody else's. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have in front of us, but also one of the opportunities that we have for us. I mean, you know, it's been how many centuries since Native American philosophy and approach to life on Earth was shunned, and it was considered, you know, backwards and not interested in developing. Today we need an environmental movement to save this world. If we had listened to that perspective 500 years ago, we would be in a completely different place today. We will be valuing and using and interacting. It doesn't mean that we have to do away with everything that we have today. It means that it will be a much more balanced approach to life.